Hello, and welcome back to Tips and Time Savers. I'm Danny Rocks, and in today's lesson I'm going to demonstrate how you can record a macro in Excel to fix an imported text file. I created this video tutorial in response to a viewer who wrote to say, Danny, I have a problem. Each month the IT department sends me a report. They send it to me as a text file. I import it into Excel, and this is what it looks like. And here's the problem. The headers, as you can see, are on two rows. I want them to be on one row. Each of the records is on two rows. I want it to be on one row, and I want to eliminate the blank row in between each of the records and the blank row between the header and the first record. Can you help me? Yes, we're going to record a simple macro. A macro combines multiple steps into one operation. You can activate the macro by assigning a keyboard shortcut to it, or as you'll see later on in this lesson, assigning it to a button that you can simply click. Now, before we can go any further, in Excel 2010, Excel 2007, you want to make sure that the Developer tab is showing on the ribbon. It doesn't show on the ribbon by default. Here's how you do it in Excel 2010. Come over here and click File to open up Backstage View. Come down here and click Options. Then on the Customize Ribbon tab, this is brand new in Excel 2010, on the Customize Ribbon tab, come over here and ensure that the check mark appears next to the developer. Now it's going to appear on the main ribbon. Okay, now let's plan this out. What we're going to do in our macro is we're going to come over, we're going to select this cell, cut, and then paste. Cut and paste, cut and paste. Then what we want to do is we want to, of course, now this is going to be a blank row. Select the two rows that we want to delete them, and then make sure that our mouse finishes on the cell for the next record. Now, as another best practice, I like to make sure that when I'm working on a macro that I have a backup of the data. Let me show you a great way that we can create a quick backup. So you see I have two blank worksheets and I want to have copies on both of them. So first I'm going to go into group mode. I have create macros selected, hold down shift, select sheet 3. Now I have three worksheets in group mode. Now let's select this data, and then on the Home tab of the ribbon, come over here in Editing, and under Fill, select Fill across the worksheets. We want to fill both the content as well as any formatting. Click OK, and now click one of the other worksheets to exit group mode, and you can see that I've now got backup. So that's going to be a lot easier. Okay, so we want to start with our cell on the upper leftmost cell that we're going to begin our macro with. We don't want to be selecting a cell at the beginning of the macro. So it'll be on the cell where you want to begin. Then from the Developer tab of the ribbon, this is important. Make sure that you click Use Relative References. You see that it's a toggle. Now it's off, now it's on. That's going to be important. Next, come up here and say Record the macro. All right, let's give it a name. Let's say convert to 1. Two rows to 1. I want to assign a shortcut with it. A shortcut can only contain a letter or a number. And what I like to do so it doesn't override an existing Control plus letter is hold down Shift. So let's make it A. It's going to be very easy for us to do this in a repetitious manner. We also have some other choices, and for right now I'm going to keep it in this workbook. I'll explain the differences in another lesson, and I'll also explain why it's important to put a description in there. All right, let's click OK. Now we're recording. So remember, we had this cell selected first. So from that starting point, come over here, select the cell. I'll use the keyboard shortcut Control X to place a to cut it, Control V to paste it. I'll repeat this, Control X, Control V. If you like to use commands, it's very simple. Either keyboard shortcuts or the actual commands will work. So cut, and then we want to paste. All right, now you see that we have two blank rows. So let's make the selection over here, and you can also use your right mouse click with the shortcut menu. So in this case, I want to delete the two rows that I've selected. Now here's the important step. What we want to do is we want to make sure that we end with our cell on the upper leftmost cell so that we can repeat this macro. Now at this point, what we can do is we can stop recording. One way to do that is to click the stop recording button. There's also a button down here in the status bar to stop the recording. Alright, now we have our macro. It's time to test it out. What we'll do is I'll come over here. I'm on the developer tab of the ribbon, and I want to come over here into macros. Here's the macro that I just created, and I'm going to click run. And there you go. You see how it did it? Now remember our keyboard shortcut that we had in there? It was Control-Shift-A. So you see the importance of ending your macro at that position, Control-Shift-A. Very, very simple to do. Another way that we can test out the macro is we can actually examine it. So let's again click from the developer tab of the ribbon, macros, but this time instead of running it, I want to edit it. So now this opens up Visual Basic. So this is how Excel interpreted our recording of the macro. It created a VBA module for us. So this is the macro. Now in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to step into the macro. So over here, when I click the macro, selected it and say edit, now over here in the Visual Basic Explorer, I'm going to click on debug. Notice that there is a keyboard shortcut F8 to step into it. So F8 moves me down, and there you go. So it moves past the comments, it moves past the note about the keyboard shortcut. Now as I press F8 to step into it, each step, so you see it's selecting the cell and cutting it, it's selecting the cell and pasting it. F8 again, it's coming over, selecting the cell, cut, select the cell, paste. Move over, select the cell, cut, paste, and then select the two rows, delete them, and then end up by coming over to the cell where we can begin to do this all over again. So it's really, really, really simple. Now what I want to do this time is I want to create a button. So rather than doing Control-Shift-A, our keyboard shortcut, I want to create a button. Once again, from the Developer tab on the ribbon in Excel 2007-2010, come over here into Insert, and in the Form Controls, I want to insert a button. Now let's draw the button, and it's going to say something like, oh, it opens up a dialog box first. So which macro do we want to assign to it? So in the Assign Macro, click over here, click OK. And now here is our button, and it has just a plain text over here. So I want to change this to be something more meaningful. So I want to right mouse click in here, and what I want to do is select edit the text. So over here what I want to do is convert two rows to one row. You can put anything that you want, and don't hit enter, just click outside. So now we have our macro. Make sure that you have the cell that you want to begin your macro selected. Click the button. There you go. You see how it returns back there? Click again, click again, click again, and click again. Now if something went wrong, that's why I have my backup copies of the original data. Now in Excel 2003, which the viewer who wrote me is using, what we want to do is something similar. So over here I have all of the information. I'll just widen the columns over here to begin with. I'm not going to make my backup copy, but I'm going to show you how to record the macro in Excel 2003. First, come over here into Tools, and what we want to do is we want to come down here into Macro. The first thing we want to do is we want to examine the security level. What I'm going to recommend is that we keep it at the medium level and click OK. return over here to Tools, Macro, and in this case I want to record a new macro. For right now, we're just going to leave it as Macro 1, and I will assign a keyboard shortcut. I'm going to hold down Shift. I'll do the letter Z. Again, that's going to be very, very close by. I'll leave this default text in there. Click OK. Now, what I have in Excel 2003, and this causes people fits, is you get this little record macro toolbar over here. So we want to first off make sure that our relative references is on. You see how that becomes shaded? That's important. And also remember that I was in cell A1 before I began this. Now I am recording the macro. So once again, I'll come over here. I'm going to select Control X, keyboard shortcut to cut, Control V to paste, Control X, Control V, Control X, Control V. Next, I want to select the 2 blank rows, right mouse click and say delete, and then important that I finish the macro by selecting the upper left cell where I want to be able to repeat this action. So now I'm just going to come over here and say stop. And once again, if I want to examine the macro, Tools, Macro, and in this case what I want to do is I want to look at the list of macros, same dialog box, and in this case I want to again look at the editing. There is the Visual Basic Explorer, and you can see the VBA code that's been written. We can also do the same thing with debug. So debug on the menu, and what we want to do is we want to step into it. So click step into to begin it, and then F8 will continue. So you see how you can follow along with what your macro is doing. So the debug is a great way to examine if there is a mistake. And now let me switch back to Excel 2010 to show you the final important element here. So we have our macro, and now when we want to save it, beginning with Excel 2007 and continuing into Excel 2010, if you create a macro and you want to save the workbook, you can't save it as a normal Excel workbook. You must save it as a macro-enabled workbook. That's extremely important. So I'm going to keep the same name, but I'm going to change the type to a macro-enabled workbook. Click OK. And just before I conclude the lesson, I also want to show you that in Excel 2007, Excel 2010, if you click on Macro Security, come over here and you can confirm the security settings, but also what's important in Excel 2007-2010 is come over here and make sure that you store this workbook in what's called a trusted location. So I've already created a trusted location down here, and now I'll be able to run this macro. So now if I close this, and now if I come back and I come into recent and open it, it's going to open up and I'm not going to get any warnings. If I hadn't saved it as an Excel macro enabled workbook, all of that work would have been gone. All of those macros would have disappeared. So over here I could either use the keyboard shortcut Control Shift A, Control Shift A, Control Shift A, and repeat it, or I could have created the button. So there you've learned how to create a macro so that you can take away a lot of the drudgery. You can combine multiple steps into one command, keyboard shortcut or with a button. And I'll look for you in the next lesson.